The wire buckled on the left flank before the first man got his rifle to his shoulder. I heard the warning shout from Corporal Devlin, 3 short blasts on a field whistle, and then the night turned into something else entirely. Tracer rounds arced across the defensive trench line in flat orange lines, and the assault wave hit our perimeter with the kind of noise that reaches inside your chest and presses on something you did not know was there. RPGs detonated in quick succession along the outer berms, and the concussion rolled over the sandbags in waves. Men were shouting position reports, shouting magazine counts, shouting names of men who were not answering. For about 4 seconds nobody moved except to press lower against the earthen walls and figure out which direction was the immediate threat. That was the night I learned what bowstring could do. She had been standing on our position for 6 hours before the assault began, and in that time she had not said 20 words to any of us. She had built her hide on a plywood shelf braced into the right corner of the trench, where the line bent at a slight angle and gave a long diagonal view across the wire and the open ground beyond it. She had done this without asking permission and without making a noise that drew attention to herself. I noticed her the way you notice a sandbag that wasn't there yesterday, present, functional, not drawing comment until you happen to look directly at it. She was young, not slight, but lean in the way of distance runners and people who have been carrying weight for a long time. She wore her gear the way people who have carried it for years wear it, without adjustment, without fidgeting, without any of the microchecks that newer soldiers make when they want to look squared away. She had a bolt-action rifle with a suppressor the length of my forearm and a precision scope with a thick objective lens. She had set 2 spare magazines flat on the plywood shelf within easy reach and a water bottle to her left. She had also set a small notebook and a pencil. When I first saw the notebook I thought it was personal, a journal maybe. I found out later what it was for. I was a squad sergeant, 8 years in, and I looked at her and thought what most of us thought. I am not proud of it, but I will not scrub it from the telling. The thought was this: she is just a girl, and somebody in operations made an error putting her on a defensive line in the Aldara Valley tonight. Sergeant First Class Halvorsen said it out loud. Halvorsen ran the second gun position 40 meters to my left, a wide man with the kind of confidence that fills a room even when the room is a dirt trench and the room doesn't have walls. He walked past her hide on a perimeter check around hour 3 and stopped and looked her over the way a man looks at equipment he doesn't trust. He read the call sign identifier off her radio handset. He said it the way you'd say a punchline. Bowstring, he put an extra beat on it. What kind of call sign is that for a girl? She did not look up from her scope. She was running a final 0 verification, adjusting her elevation for the ambient temperature and the distance markers she'd already ranged on the terrain features beyond the wire. The kind they gave me, she said. Halvorsen made a sound in his throat and walked on. He said it just loud enough for 3 of us to hear. Just a girl. Somebody in operations has a sense of humor tonight. 2 of the men laughed. I did not laugh, but I also did not correct him. That is something I have carried since that night. When the assault wave hit the wire, Halvorsen's gun position went to sustained fire almost immediately, and I could hear his crew burning through the first belt. The left flank was where the enemy had massed. I estimated 30 to 40 fighters pushing hard against a trench section held by 8 men, 2 of whom were dealing with a jammed saw that wasn't going to clear quietly. I got on the radio and called it up the chain, and the reply that came back was that no reinforcement was available for a minimum of 12 minutes. 12 minutes is a very long time when a perimeter is buckling. I looked right toward Bowstring's hide. She had not moved from her scope. Her left hand was flat on the stock, elbow planted, her right hand loose on the pistol grip with only the index finger engaged, her cheek welded to the pad. She was breathing in a slow, even rhythm that I could see in the rise and fall of her shoulders. I noticed that because everything else at that moment was operating at a different tempo entirely. The first shot was quiet. That is the only word I have for it. The suppressor reduced it to a sharp, directional crack, nothing like the punishing report of open fire. Downrange, 210 meters out at my estimate, where the assault element was stacking at a gap in the outer wire, a man dropped. Not in any theatrical sense. He simply ceased to stand. The man behind him paused for a fraction of a second, and in that pause she fired again. 2 shots, 2 men, not quite 4 seconds. The assault element at the gap hesitated. You could see it even in the dark, even through the chaos of fire from the left. The surge of forward movement stopped, and then the element began angling away from the gap, trying to find a line of advance that didn't present them to whoever was shooting. This is what accurate fire does to an attacking formation. It does not need to drop every man. It needs to make forward movement feel like a conscious decision rather than a momentum, because formations that move on momentum are hard to stop, and formations that have to think about each step are already failing. She did not let them think on their own terms. I counted her shots over the next 4 minutes the way you count without meaning to when something demands your full attention. Shot 5 broke the team pushing a breaching charge toward the wire. They dropped the charge and went flat. Shot 7 dropped a team leader. I could tell because the 2 men flanking him paused and looked toward each other instead of moving forward, which means the man who had been giving direction was no longer giving it. Shot 9 took the RPG carrier on the right edge of the element, which silenced the one weapon that could have put a direct fire round into our trench line. Shot 11 was a long reach across the diagonal. I estimated 260 meters at that angle, and it struck the man who had been coordinating the assault with a handheld laser designator, marking breach points for the teams pushing forward. After that 11th shot, the assault element's coordination fell apart. The sub-elements stopped linking up. One group went left, one group went right, and neither group was making controlled progress. The forward push on the right side of our wire slowed and then stopped entirely. Then the enemy shifted its weight. That is what a capable assault commander does when one axis stalls. He redirects pressure to another point. The right flank, which had been the quieter sector before the fight began, was now where the enemy commander sent his reserve element. I could see them pushing through the darkness in a wider arc, trying to come at the corner of the wire at an angle that might shield them from whatever had stopped the first group. There were at minimum 15 fighters in the redirected push. Bowstring rotated her field of fire without leaving her hide. I do not know exactly when she identified the shift in the attack earlier than I did, I believe. She was already tracking the reserve element when I realized it existed. She began engaging the new group with the same tempo. 1 round. A pause of perhaps 3 seconds. 1 round. The element could not establish forward momentum, because every time it established a forward element, that element acquired a problem that required attention. I watched her do this for 4 minutes. Shot 16 ended the advance on the right flank. The man who had been pushing the element from the rear, managing its direction and pace, stopped managing. I will not describe the shot beyond what is necessary. The element lost its coherence and went to ground, individually and in small groups, in the open terrain between the outer and inner wire. Men who go to ground outside a defended position in the dark and stop moving have made a decision, whether they know it or not, to wait rather than assault. Static targets on the wrong side of a wire line are no longer a threat to the line. Havorson's crew handled the left flank through suppressive fire, and the jammed saw finally cleared at minute 7. At minute 9, a relief element came over the northern ridge and added weight to the left, and the assault's coherence collapsed entirely. I heard the pullback commands being relayed in the dark beyond the wire, a language I don't speak, but the sound of a formation being ordered to withdraw carries its own clarity. It was quiet by minute 11. Havorson came down the trench line in the silence that follows a fight, that particular silence that is not peace, because it is only the absence of something that was present and threatening moments before. His face was dust gray, and there was a graze on his left sleeve that had bled through the fabric. He stopped at Bowstring's hide and looked at her. She was logging her shots in the small notebook I had dismissed 3 hours earlier as something personal. Neat columns. Range estimates in the first column, time marks in the second, brief outcome notations in the third. Single words. I looked at the count before she closed the notebook. 18 entries. The right flank had absorbed a redirected assault of 15 or more fighters. Our casualties on the right side were 0. Bowstring had held the corner alone with 18 rounds. Halvorsen stood there for a long moment. He is a man who, in my 8 years of service alongside men like him, always had something to say. He stood looking at the notebook and then at the dark ground beyond the wire where the assault element had withdrawn, and then at her hands, which were already breaking down the rifle with the practiced ease of someone who has done it so many times that darkness is not a limitation. He did not speak for a long count of seconds. Then he said, "Bowstring." She looked up at him. "Good shooting," he said. Not the tone he'd used 6 hours ago when he read her call sign off the identifier and made the men laugh. This was the tone one professional uses with another when the evidence is standing in front of both of them and there is nothing else honest to say. He meant it completely. I could hear that he meant it. She held his gaze. "Thank you, Sergeant." She went back to her rifle. I filed my after-action notation that night. The line in my notes that I have not changed reads as follows: right flank held, 0 casualties on right sector, 18 rounds expended, consistent with sniper engagement log provided by Bowstring. Right flank held independently. Halvorsen put in the citation request the following morning. I signed it alongside him. We wrote it together at the folding table in the operations tent while it was still dark, drinking bad coffee, and neither of us said the thing that did not need saying. The men who had been in that trench did not use the phrase, "just a girl" again. I did not hear it from any of them in the weeks that followed, and I do not believe it occurred to them any more in the form it had before the assault. What I heard instead, when Bowstring moved through the forward area or came into the operations tent to receive her next assignment, was quieter than her call sign and more accurate than anything Halvorsen had said in the dark before the assault began. "She can shoot." 3 words said plainly and without decoration. In a forward trench in the Aldara Valley, among men who had spent years deciding who was worth listening to, those 3 words carried everything that needed carrying.